Good morning. How we doing? All right, you guys like the back of the church. I didn't realize that last time I came up here. Like everybody's crowded in those back seats. We're gonna have to start pulling some of those seats out, so you guys have to move forward more. But welcome to church again. Glad that you guys are here with us. And if you are new here, my name is Seth. I'm one of the pastors here at the Well. And I do just want to reiterate again on behalf of the staff, Happy Mother's Day. We're glad that Mother's Day is one of the highest attended Sundays of the whole year. Like it's there with Easter and Christmas, believe it or not. Father's Day is actually one of the lowest attended Sundays of the whole year. So I don't know what that means, other than dads be better. But with that, we're glad that you chose to worship with us this morning, and we're glad that we get to be a part of your life in some small way. And so, speaking of mothers, my wife is a mother 4 times over, and I don't know if you guys know this, but she is actually just as nerdy as I am. Like, you guys have gotten to find out how nerdy I am, but she really is just as nerdy as I am, if not worse, possibly. It just manifests in a different way. Let me give you an example, okay? When we were dating, my wife bragged to me that she could speak, read, and write Elvish from Lord of the Rings. Okay? Bragged about it. Like, thought it was cool. And so do with that what you will. And so along those lines, some of my nerdiness comes out with things like the ancient Near East, because that relates to the Bible and how some of these ancient stories were written, what was going on behind them, those sorts of things. And so along with that kind of ancient history, Katie gets really nerdy about Greek and Roman mythologies. She's all into learning some of those stories and figuring out how they shaped cultures and things like that. And she's recently started listening to this musical adaptation of Homer's The Iliad. Most of you are probably at least somewhat familiar with that, but this is what she listens to musically for fun. So again, you can see some of that nerdiness coming out. And so my oldest daughter, she recently, just going through school, she's been learning history, and she started learning about some of these ancient cultures and was shocked to realize that the stories that are being sung in mom's music aren't just stories from the music. Like the music got them from somewhere else. She heard them first in the music, and then she starts studying history, and she starts learning about Greek and Roman culture, and she's like, oh my goodness, there's this whole world behind these stories that I had no idea about all of this. And so it was suddenly the shift for her from just some enjoyable music to something that was far bigger than anything that she ever imagined. It was sort of like all of it just kind of opened up to her. Have you ever had something happen like that in your life? Where you started, like you liked something a little bit, and then you realized that there was so much more context behind it, that there was a bigger story behind it. Like I was recently talking with somebody about a TV show, and they were like, well, it's based on books, you know? And I was like, what? I had no idea. And so there's this whole story. Not all the shows are out yet. I can go read all the books. The story's there, and it's this bigger world than I even knew what it was. Maybe you're somebody who you've quoted from a movie, right? Maybe you're somebody who quotes movies regularly, but maybe you're somebody who you've quoted from a movie, but you didn't even realize you were quoting from a movie. You just heard it somewhere, and you've been throwing that quote around, and maybe you found out the context of the movie at one point, and you're like, oh no, I should not have been quoting that. I did not know that's what that meant. Right? Like I've found myself there because I'm not a big movie lover. I know that's weird. My attention span is short. I grew up in a TikTok generation. It's fine. And so I'm not a huge movie watcher. So I'll say things because I heard somebody say them somewhere. And somebody's like, do you know where that came from? And I'm like, yeah, that came from my friend back in high school. And they're like, no, that's not where that came from. There's a bigger story behind this. And I think that kind of sets the context for today. Because I would be willing to bet that almost everybody in here, in fact, you guys can raise your hands, have you heard the phrase before, an eye for an eye? Yeah. Okay, so the vast majority of us have heard that phrase, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Did you know, and you can raise your hand for this, raise your hand if you knew that it came from this, that it was in the Sermon on the Mount. Okay, a couple of you. Raise your hand if you knew that it was in the Old Testament before that. Okay, a few of you. Raise your hand if you knew it was in the ancient code of Hammurabi before that. Okay. So there's some context that opens this up, right? Do you see where I'm going with this? There's a lot of baggage that brings with this. And so we're going to read our passage in Matthew chapter 5 this morning, Matthew 5, verse 38. And if you don't have a Bible, if you haven't owned a Bible, we want you to know that in that white kiosk right outside the door there, we've got some Bibles back there. Those are our gift to you. That's for you to have, for you to take home. And so we would love to have you be able to actually follow along in the scriptures with us. So that said, Matthew chapter 5, verses 38 through 42, this is still Jesus speaking in the Sermon on the Mount, and he says, "You have heard that it was said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. But I tell you, don't resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you." So as we've been going through the Sermon on the Mount, you've probably noticed that there are quite a few times that Jesus has used this phrase, "You have heard that it was said," right? And so we know when Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said," we're like, oh, he's going to flip some categories for us, right? Like I thought that I knew what I was about. I thought I knew how life was working. And Jesus is about to sure, he flipped tables in the temples once, but it seems like he comes and flips the tables in our minds repeatedly, just constantly flipping categories. And so he's doing that same thing here, because this idea of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, it comes from 3 Old Testament passages: Exodus 21:24, Leviticus 24:20, and Deuteronomy 19:21. 3 passages in the Old Testament. And it makes you wonder, if the number 3 is important for something, but I'll let you guys ponder if that means anything. And so here's what these Old Testament passages are showing us. These passages are showing us God's plan for revenge. Yeah, some of you are like, weird Mother's Day message, Seth. That's all right. We'll get there. Moms are good at revenge, I think. But this is what we're seeing, okay? And so what this is breaking down for us is when we're faced with situations and when we're faced with revenge, what plan does God have for us? And this is the plan that he gave. Someone takes your eye, you take theirs. Someone takes your tooth, you knock out theirs, right? But there are a few really important things to understand here, okay? Here's what Tim Mackey from the Bible Project says. He says, quote, "This can sound to some people like it's license to get even. The intent of the rule was in many ways the opposite. It was about putting a ceiling on vengeance getting out of control," unquote. That alone kind of starts to reshape your categories, doesn't it? When you say an eye for an eye and you realize, oh, this is about a ceiling. This is about what's the furthest somebody can go. And even before the Old Testament was written, there was ancient law code that prevented revenge from getting out of control, because as it turns out, we're really good at letting our revenge get out of control, aren't we? Yes, we are. We are really bad about that. Here's the reality. Have you guys ever watched those videos on the internet with the people with road rage? Right? Like somebody just marginally does something and the other person gets out of their car and they're screaming. Maybe they start throwing things. We see this stuff. Maybe you're in one of those videos. I don't know. But we know that somebody makes a simple mistake and our version of revenge just shoots way over the top. I won't name any of my kids because maybe it's all of them. But lately my kids have been really struggling to play with each other, which to me is bonkers, because I'm like, this is your only job at this point in life. Your only job is to have fun and survive. That's it. And you guys are struggling so much with the having fun part. Just play with each other, right? Okay, some of you haven't dealt with that. But here's the thing. My kids will run into the room. Lately, this has happened multiple times. They run into the room screaming bloody murder because something crazy's happened. And this is a real story, okay? They will run in screaming because someone ripped a branch off a tree and smacked the other kid in the face with it. And so we're like, what is going on? Like, why would you have done that? What possibly could have made you think to take a tree branch and smack your sibling in the face? To which they answer, well, when I asked them a question, they didn't answer me. What? Like, in what world is that a reasonable response? They probably just didn't hear you because I know the way you talk to people. You're in another room and you're just having a conversation thinking people are listening to you. Like, this probably isn't even their fault, and that's the direction that you chose to go with it. And I think that's the reality that we need to sit in, because we laugh at kids when they do it and we fail to recognize that we're just as bad. That we do the same things. Church, we make terrible judges. We do, especially when it's regarding our own lives. And this is actually why it came to an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth in the Old Testament. When this happened, individuals weren't allowed to exact that justice. It had to go to the courts to decide, okay, they knocked your eye out, let's just make sure that this is equivalent revenge, because we don't trust you to take your own revenge. We don't trust that you can handle this, okay? And it's because when somebody's close to a situation, they're always going to want more retribution, or they're going to be in the midst of a blind rage, literally, if somebody took their eye out, right? And so they want to take further revenge. They go further than they should have. And so the courts come in, and the courts have to put a cap on how far you can go. You are not to exact revenge that is greater than the original offense. And this is all important because we should be learning by now that when Jesus approaches the law, he's not trying to cancel out the law and bring in a better law. He's trying to show us what the heart of the law was all along. He wants us to feel the pulse of the law. He wants us to see that the law was never about do this and don't do this, but it was all about learning the heart and the character of God and learning how to implement that in our own lives. So, we've seen God's plan for revenge, but we know that Jesus is looking at the heart. So what is God's heart for revenge? How does God actually feel about revenge? What does he want for revenge? And so this is where, again, in Matthew 5:38, Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. But I tell you, don't resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also." So he's saying, you've heard an eye for an eye, but I'm telling you, turn the other cheek. All right? So now we can get into all the context behind this, because I think that this passage is communicating something a lot different than many of us have been led to believe. One of the things that Jesus would have known is that in the law code before Moses, so that code of Hammurabi that we briefly talked about, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth only mattered if the afflicted person was of higher rank than the one afflicting. Okay? So if a master takes out the eye of a slave, that's justice. We're done. If the slave takes out the eye of the master, well, that's a different story. Now we have an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. And so then the Old Testament comes in, and the Old Testament puts a spin on that. It says, it's even across the board. There is dignity for everybody. Because you're a slave doesn't mean that you have less dignity. Because you're a master doesn't mean that you have more dignity. It's even across the board. And so we had this law that defended the dignity of those with higher social status, and the Old Testament subverts this idea to show how retribution can be used to provide dignity for everyone. But then we get to Matthew chapter 5, and it keeps developing. And here's the thing. It sure looks to me like Jesus is telling us to lose our dignity. Right? Like if somebody slaps you and you turn the other cheek to them, it kind of feels like you've lost a little bit of dignity. Right? And if someone's abusing me and I just let them continue to treat me like a doormat, then I am quickly being degraded and I am losing tremendous dignity. So what in the world is Jesus trying to communicate here? because it has to line up with the heart of God that we've already seen in the Old Testament. So to demonstrate this, I actually need a volunteer to demonstrate what it means to turn the other cheek. And do not worry, I will not actually slap you, okay? That's not part of this. Do I have anybody? Because if not, I'm gonna ask somebody. Okay, Isaiah, you're up. This is what you get for sitting close. And you can get up here faster than your dad can. So otherwise, I would have put him on the spot. So here's what it says, okay? It says, if anyone strikes you on the right cheek. Okay, this is important because who in here is right-handed? Most of you, okay? The same thing was true in the ancient world. So Isaiah, if I were to strike you on the right cheek, which cheek is the right cheek?
This one.
So what am I doing? Do you see it? I've got to backhand him. And if you turn the other cheek, now which cheek am I striking? My left cheek, which is my forehand. Do you see where this matters a little bit? You can actually go back to your seat now. That's good. Thank you. Thank you. So, yeah, you did great. You did great. And so this is really important because, see, I think even we recognize, even in this culture now, that if somebody backhand slaps you, that's not just to inflict pain, right? That's degrading. That's belittling. That's something that is existing to show you that you deserve shame. That's what you're doing. And as big as that is in this culture, it was huge in their culture. It was something that was of enormous importance in that culture. It was bad enough that if somebody backhanded slapped you, you could sue them for the shame that they caused you and your family. Because honor and shame was everything in that culture. And so if somebody shamed you, you could lose it all. You're at the bottom of the totem pole now. You've lost all your dignity. And so you could literally sue somebody for that. Craig Keener, who's a New Testament scholar, he says that a backhanded slap is, quote, the severest public affront to someone's dignity, unquote. The severest, right? That takes it further than what we know. And so here's what's happening. Jesus is saying that if someone backhanded slaps you, you should turn to them the other cheek. If someone publicly shames you, then you turn to them your other cheek to say, I reject the way that you are treating me as somebody who is less human than you, and I'm giving you the opportunity to try again and to strike me as your equal. What a wild idea. Because you would only forehand slap somebody who was your equal. And that's what you're declaring. James Baldwin, who was a civil rights activist, he once said, quote, if I am not who you say I am, then you are not who you think you are, unquote. And so this is that idea that when you turn the other cheek, you're saying, no. My dignity is not down here. I am made in the image of God. And so if I'm not this belittled subhuman, then you must not be who you think you are either. And I'm prepared to expose that in you, even if it comes through my own suffering. See, in some ways, Jesus is not commanding just the dignity that you deserve, but he's also commanding you to expose evil in others. In some way, you are shocking them to see their own evil. And this is why Jesus begins with saying, don't resist evil, which doesn't mean to just let evil do whatever it desires. The Apostle Paul, he quotes from this and he unpacks it and changes it a little bit for us. And it helps us when he does this to show us what it actually means, because Paul says, do not repay evil with evil. That's what it means to resist evil. Don't come at it with the same kind. We don't fight fire with fire when we follow Jesus. We fight fire with water. We fight darkness with love, or with light. We fight hate with love. And so this is why John Collins of the Bible Project, again, he says, quote, this means that you stand against them, but don't make them the enemy. We understand that's hard to do, right? Right? We know that. To stand against somebody, but don't actually turn them into the enemy. They're not the enemy, but the evil that's influencing them. The work that the enemy is doing in them. That's what we're opposed to. And so this is far different than laying down and losing your dignity to evil. This is standing up against evil via nonviolent resistance. And I'm immediately reminded of Martin Luther King Jr. and his movement for equality, which in so many ways embodied what it means to turn the other cheek. I have this image here I wanted to show you guys. So this is from Bloody Sunday. If you recall what that is, it was Martin Luther King Jr.'s march in Selma. And Martin Luther King Jr., he knew that they were going to face some sort of violent resistance. He was prepared for violent resistance. In fact, they trained people. They would scream in their faces. They would belittle them so that they knew when you get out there, they are going to do this to you and you will not respond violently. You will continue marching in peace to expose their evil. And so they marched on this Sunday. And as they marched, they were sprayed with tear gas. They had dogs sent to attack them. They were sprayed with fire hoses. And yet they continued to peacefully march. It was their way of saying, you are treating me as less than human, but I will keep marching. I will keep turning the other cheek until you acknowledge that I am just as human as you are. They were demanding dignity. And yet they refused to fight fire with fire. Or in the words of Paul, they refused to repay evil with evil. There's this document that I also have an image of. This may be a little bit harder for some of you to see, but this is a pledge that anyone who wanted to march with Martin Luther King Jr. had to sign. You can actually find a copy of this in his book, Why We Can't Wait. And basically this pledge says that you're going to give your body, you're going to give of yourself to this nonviolent movement. And what it's doing is it is explicitly saying, you will not repay evil with evil. It is explicitly saying this is a nonviolent movement. You will not degrade or you will not injure another human being. It explicitly tells you that you are fighting for the freedom and dignity of all, which means that you are not just fighting for the dignity of those who are marching with you, you are fighting for the dignity of those who are marching against you. This is a big thing. And so this is the masterpiece of the Sermon on the Mount. It wasn't all that long ago that Jesus told us, blessed is the peacemaker. And when Philip Wiggins came and when he preached on what it means to be a peacemaker, he talked about the need for creative peacemaking. This is creative peacemaking. Turning the other cheek is creative peacemaking. And this is what the people of God do. And the people of God are free to respond in this sort of way because we hold on to the hope of resurrection. And we hold on to the hope of the Holy Spirit, who we know will take the implications of our actions and take them far further than we ever anticipated. That we may have a little movement here, we may have one impact with one person, but we have no idea the generational impact that the Holy Spirit is planning. This is God's heart for dignity. See, it's actually far less about God's heart for revenge and far more about God's heart for dignity and for the value of human beings. This is how God uses revenge for dignity. But there's another way that God addresses his heart for revenge and for dignity in this. Matthew chapter 5, verse 40. Jesus says, and if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. Now, this doesn't sound that crazy to us, right? Because I've got a coat that I use for when I come to church. I've got a coat that I like to use when I ride my bike. I've got a lot of hoodies. A lot of them are for the Anaheim Ducks because they've had a few color schemes throughout the past 30 years. And so I've got to be able to represent every single color scheme that my team's ever had, right? And some of my coats are warmer. Some of them are cooler. Some are different colors to match for different color schemes and all that kind of stuff. And you guys are probably the same, right? You probably have a windbreaker, maybe you've got a winter coat, maybe you've got some hoodies. And so when Jesus says, hand over your coat, you're like, okay, I'd rather not, but okay. It's not too crazy. I can go buy another one, right? That's kind of what it feels like. But this wasn't the case then, okay? And this is another way that Jesus is doing something shocking, right? It is a historical fact that most people in this time had two articles of clothing. You had your tunic and you had your coat. Your tunic was the one article of clothing that was up against the skin. It was the shirt, the pants, all of it, all in one. That's your tunic, that's your shirt. And then you have your coat. In the Old Testament, there are laws against borrowing somebody's coat. Because if you borrow the coat of somebody who especially is poor or somebody who's a widow, something like that, then what are they going to do when it comes time to sleep at night? Because this may be the only warmth that they own. And so you could borrow something, say somebody borrows something from you and you say, okay, but I'm going to need something back to make sure I'm going to get back from you. So I'll take your coat. And Jesus, the Bible says, the Old Testament says, yes, you can do that, but you still have to return it to them by nighttime, even if they haven't returned your thing. You cannot let them go without their coat at night. And if they're a widow or if they're poor, you don't even have an option to take their coat. You figure something else out, because that may be the only possession that they have. And so Jesus is coming in with radical generosity. Because what's happening is people are going, they're trying to subvert the law. Okay, I can't take your coat, so now I'm going to sue you and I'm going to take your shirt. If I can't take your coat, I'll take your shirt. I'll take something else, right? I found a loophole in the rules. And Jesus is coming in and saying, okay, listen, if they really need your shirt that bad, give them your coat too. That's radical generosity. But also, that's shocking. I don't know if you put the pieces together yet, but if you think about it just for a little bit, you've got a tunic and you've got a coat. And that's everything you're wearing. And they took your tunic and you said, here's my coat. This is shocking. It's supposed to be shocking. In his book, Streams of Living Water, Richard Foster tells the story of St. Francis of Assisi. And if you don't recognize that name, you may recognize the title of the movement, the Franciscan monks. And if not that, then there's the Pope who just recently passed, who named himself St. Francis after this order. It was from St. Francis of Assisi. And so the story goes that St. Francis, as he was growing up, before he was a saint, before he was a Christian, he was growing up, he took his dad's money and he went out, he lived this lavish life. He lived recklessly. He went out just doing all the things that he'd want to do for fun. He was getting into fights. He was just everything you hope your kid doesn't do. That's what he was doing. And eventually he did this to the point that he found himself incarcerated. And it was during those dark and lonely months that God met him. And that he gave his life to God and decided that everything he was going to be about was following God. And so when he got out of prison, he actually just lived as a hermit near the Catholic Church. And he writes that he heard the voice of God come to him and say, rebuild my church. And so St. Francis begins by actually repairing some of the walls of the church, but then he realizes that there's more to it than just the building itself. He's got to go out and he's got to love the people. He's got to serve the people. And so he goes out and he starts giving just radical generosity, buying lavish things for the poor in the community. But he's still doing it with all his dad's money. This is all still his dad's money. So now his father is getting furious with him. His dad is angry, and so his dad comes into the church, brings St. Francis before the bishop, and is furious and is demanding his money back. And here's what the book says. It says, quote, Francesco responded by renouncing all claims to his father's estate and returning all goods, including the clothes on his back, so that he stood naked before the bishop. He then turned to his father, saying, until now I called you my father, but from now on I can say without reserve, our Father who art in heaven. He is all my wealth, and I place all my confidence in him. Unquote. Man, I'm glad I wasn't that bishop. Right? Like if this is what it meant to get into pastoral ministry, I don't know. I might have found something else. But this is subversive generosity. This is public suffering in order to shock the person's conscience and to expose their injustice. And I know how insane it sounds. But think about how Jesus lived his life. Turning the other cheek as he went to the cross. Suffering naked and exposed on the cross. And yet there's still more that Jesus told us in this passage. There's still more for us to do. Matthew 5:41 and 42. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. So we'll try to cover this last point a little bit quicker. But Roman soldiers had to carry an incredible amount of equipment. So the law allowed for them to order anybody, to carry my gear for me. But the Romans also realized how likely it would be that somebody would exploit this law. So they said, yes, you can demand that somebody carries this for you, but only for 1 mile. And then after that, you got to let them go. And so think about this, though. Think about what Jesus would have experienced, because it's likely that it's Mother's Day. You're out, you're having a good dinner with your kids who are here from out of state. You don't normally get to see them. And a soldier comes by and says, you, carry my stuff. And you're like, I'm here with my kids. I almost never get to see my kids. That's weird. I don't remember asking about your kids. Carry my stuff. And you have to do it. Do you see how demeaning this is? Do you see how belittling this is? And so now you have to walk that mile with them. But what if you offered a second mile? What a bizarre thought, right? To go the extra mile is to be a friend. Like, think about it for a second. If you were moving, you buy a new house, you're moving homes, who do you call? These are not just, you don't just go down the friends list, right? And figure out, you don't start scrolling on Facebook and be like, all right, I'll just let everybody here know. You're like, no, I have certain friends. Only a couple people are going to say yes to this. Also the people with trucks, right? So I don't drive a truck. But this is who we call, right? We have certain friends. Javier gets a lot of calls to move, I guess. And so what Jesus is saying is, in this situation, and in the former situation, you are responding by saying, clearly you need help, so here I am. You need a shirt? Here I am. Take my coat. You need me to carry this a mile for you? Here I am. I'll take it too. I'm going to be radically kind to you. I'm going to be radically generous to you. And think about what this means to the person who is subjugating you. I read this story about a man who he lived his life in slavery. He lived his life in South Africa in slavery, and somebody had demanded to him to do something. And he does the job, and he turns around to this man, and he says, is there anything else I can do for you, sir? I'd love to have another job. And the man had no idea what to do with it, because he's never had somebody who responded so kindly to him. You finish the job and you move on. You don't want another job. You don't want to go the extra mile. Many of you know Martin Luther King Jr.'s quote when he said that darkness cannot drive out darkness and hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. But here's how the quote concludes. He says, quote, love is the only force capable of transforming an enemy into a friend. John 15:13-15. Jesus says, my command is this, love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. And you are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants, because the servant doesn't know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends. For everything that I learned from my Father, I have made known to you. Church, the heart of God for revenge is the gospel. That's where all of this has been pointing all along. It's the gospel. To turn the other cheek is the gospel. To go the extra mile is the gospel. To give your coat is the gospel. And the gospel is that the God of the universe, which the Bible literally tells us that we were his enemies, and Jesus now says, I call you friend. Every right to call us enemies, even to subjugate us and call us servants. He calls us friend. And so we do the same. This is what it means to go out into the world and to live like Jesus. To turn enemies to friends. We show radical love to the world. We show radical generosity. That's what it means to turn the other cheek. It's not that we lay down and allow ourselves to get kicked and treated as a doormat. But just like Jesus, we subvert the power of darkness with radical love. We love because he first loved us. And so maybe you're somebody who has yet to realize just how much Jesus loves you. Maybe you're somebody who has yet to realize that Jesus invites you to be called friend. not to just be at odds, not to just be another person out in the world, not to be a nobody, but to be a friend. He invites you into that. And he does that in the face of your brokenness. He chose to love you in the face of your brokenness. And he loved and loves you in a radical way. And so if that's you today, you're invited. That if you need to have this moment with Jesus to finally say, yeah, I want to be called a friend of Jesus. That's your invitation today. And after the services, I'm going to be available here at the front of the stage, hopefully with some other prayer partners so that we can sit with you, we can pray with you, we can try to answer questions, we can try to wrestle through whatever's going on in your heart and your mind. We're here for you. For all of us, here are a few takeaways this morning. Number one, creatively seek peace. Okay, this is your calling as Christians. Creatively seek peace. It's easy to seek peace by saying, hey, if you don't knock it off, we're going to fight, and I'm going to win. That's easy. Find a creative way to seek peace, to subvert the systems, to seek peace the way that Jesus seeks peace. Number two, this is while you're at it, expose evil and injustice. Again, when Jesus says, don't resist evil, it doesn't mean to just let evil go and do its thing in the world. It means don't repay evil with evil. And so as we seek peace, we expose the evil and the darkness in the world, because when you shine a light on darkness, it's not dark anymore. And number three, this is something for you to literally do this week. Make a plan this week. Pick someone and love them radically. Put your love into practice. Exercise this. So creatively seek peace, expose evil and injustice, and love someone radically. Let's pray this morning. God, we want to thank you for this message from Jesus. We want to thank you that Jesus shows us that while it's difficult to subvert evil, while it's difficult to stand up in the face of injustice, while it's difficult to be degraded, that there's a way to do it right. And we can see in Jesus that there's a hope on the other side, that there is life on the other side, that there is love on the other side. And so Jesus, would you transform us this morning to be more like you, to be a people who do not seek our own revenge, but we turn the other cheek, we give the coat, we go the extra mile, because we know and we understand that vengeance belongs to you, not to us. And we acknowledge that vengeance to you is something very different than what we thought it was. And so we give ourselves to you this morning, Jesus, and we just simply pray, would you use us? It's in your perfect name that we pray. Amen.